Hi, everyone. My name is Naomi Kawamura. I'm the executive director of Densho, and it's so happy to see so many of you join us for the launch of the Digital Library of Japanese American Incarceration films. This new initiative, this new collection brings together more than 100 films spanning 8 decades, reflecting how the wartime incarceration has been remembered, contested, and reinterpreted over time. The goal of this project truly advances Densho's mission to preserve history, but just as importantly, making it widely accessible and available as an educational resource that resonates across generations. So this project is the result of a collaboration between Densho and Internet Archive, specifically Densho's founder, Tom Ikeda, and Wendy Hanamura, who conceived of this project a number of years ago. And I want to thank Wendy's commitment in persevering to sort of seeing this through. And so we're very excited to be celebrating this here with both Wendy and Tom. And of course, Densho wouldn't be here without Tom Ikeda. Tom founded Densho nearly 30 years ago, and under his leadership, Densho has become a leader in the area of community archives and digital humanities. And so Tom's values continue to guide our work today. And we're so thrilled to have Tom here to talk with us and to launch this collection. So I'm going to hand off to Tom now, and thank you again, everyone, on behalf of Densho for joining us today.
So thank you, Naomi, for the introduction. Such kind words, and I just wanted to, before you leave, I know you have to go to something else and won't be able to do the whole program, but I just wanted to really acknowledge you. I mean, you have brought such energy, compassion, intelligence, to Densho, and it just made it so much easier for me to, in some ways, go onto the sidelines because as a founder you're like a proud parent and you want to just, kind of keep nurturing it. But having you step in the way you did was just, fabulous. So I just want to, thank you for all that you have done. So thank you, Naomi.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, and thank you for ongoing mentorship and ongoing engagement with Densho. So I'm going to hand off the hosting, emceeing duties to you now, and thank you, everyone.
Okay. And so, welcome everyone out there. I know pre-registration, over 500 people registered. I'm not sure how many people are here right now, but it's great to be here. I also am sad that this isn't like an in-person event so that we could all be together. And I always miss that in the community where we could be together. I could see people and we could share. But there are benefits of doing this online because we are in Seattle. It's a beautiful, sunny summer day. It's going to be 80 degrees this afternoon. And there's no way if we did this in Seattle, we could have 500 people register. It'd be a pretty small crowd. So it's great to be able to do this online and have, a lot of people. There are some housekeeping things I want to mention before we get going. One, this will be recorded. But the only people who will be shown on screen will be the speakers, the panelists. And so you won't have to worry about this being a meeting and being shown. By it being recorded, it will also be available after the show is over so that you can rewatch it or send a link to others who weren't able to do this. Um, like if we were in person, we would often do like those simple one-page flyers that would explain the program, give details, give bios of the speakers and things like that. And because we're not, in person, I can't hand those to you. But in the chat, there is a link that you can click on that goes to the event page. And in there, it'll give the details of the program as well as bios for the various panelists that are speaking today. So you can always refer to it. I remember when I go to in-person events, I always have that handy because when someone's speaking, I can refer to that to get more background information. I'll be giving brief intros to each one as we go forward, and I'm going to give the intros to each panelist right before they speak on their part. So they'll be filtered throughout. Um, the other thing I want to mention is, our co-host or our co-partner in this project and this program, and that's the Internet Archive. And we have Wendy Hanamura here who will, talk more about the Internet Archive. But they've been an incredible, important partner for Densho for many years, and I'm so glad that they're here with us, co-presenting this project. And I also want to also mention our funding for this project. It was through the Interior Department, through the National Park Service, through their Japanese American confinement sites funding program. And so we got a lot of help from the National Park Service to fund this. And a personal comment, and this is not an official, but a lot of cuts are happening in the federal funding, and Densho has been affected. So what you're seeing today, and we'll learn more about some of the projects Densho has done, has been fairly funded, and that funding is being cut. And so it's something to consider because, I'll give you kind of I guess a warning right now is at the end of the program, I am going to do a fundraising ask because I think the work of Densho is so important. And if you like what you hear, I think there is an opportunity to give. So I'll let you know that's going to be happening. So at this point, I'm going to kind of dive into the program. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually share my screen, uh, some ways to help me keep organized. And let me go uh, to the slideshow mode. And Naomi mentioned this, but I want to start with Densho's mission and how it relates actually to, this presentation. So Densho's mission is to educate, preserve, collaborate, and inspire action for equity. And if I do my job well, and I think the panelists are already in line, you're going to hear a lot of these words throughout this conversation this hour, because that's what Densho does. And I'm going to start off by giving sort of a context for the film collection we're going to be talking about today by talking about some of the other collections of Densho. And it all started, Naomi mentioned almost 30 years ago, Densho was founded. And it was started to collect stories, the oral histories of Japanese Americans who were incarcerated during World War II. And that was started in 1996. And it's now become the most comprehensive oral history collection about the World War II incarceration. Just months after starting the stories, we also started collecting photographs and documents because when you do interviews, quickly people are showing pictures or photographs, documents, letters, things like that. And so very much we decided we need to also collect those and preserve them. And so the photograph and document collection was also started almost 30 years ago. So those are kind of the foundational pieces that many people know Densho that they do in terms of, oh, they're story keepers, they collect and keep all these things. But it quickly expanded and grew, and people don't always understand this. As we talk to people about their experiences during World War II, the detention facilities came up over and over again, and pretty soon some of them were pretty obscure. We didn't know much about some of these. So Densho took on a project, a task to do a collection about the information about the detention facilities called Sites of Shame. It was launched in 2005. And, I think there's about 100 detention facilities that you can go to this resource and get information about. Another really, really important thing that I think people are starting to learn more about, not only to document, but to really to honor every individual that went through the incarceration experience. Densho started, and this was probably over like about 10 years ago. We decided to create a registry, a names registry, or a database of every Japanese American and Japanese who was incarcerated during World War II. And if you read the earlier literature, people talk about, about 120,000. Through Densho's work, it's clear that it's over 125,000, and that list keeps changing and growing as we go forward. So that's another foundational kind of collection resource that Densho's been working on, and that was launched in 2021. Kind of going backwards, and most people think of this as a resource rather than a collection, but I kind of think of it as a collection of the articles about what happened during World War II. So articles about the topics the people, the places, the events around the Japanese American incarceration. Has become the go-to resource about incarceration. And by far, this is the resource that is most used by people from Densho. And it's grown, and we actually will have um, I guess, the benefit of talking to the editor of the Densho Encyclopedia, Brian Niiya, a little bit later in the program. But after we started the Densho, and it keeps growing, an extension of the Densho Encyclopedia uh, is the resource guide. Because in addition to just talking about the topics, the people, what you quickly recognize there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books, films, websites, curriculum pieces about what happened to Japanese Americans, and they all attempt to sort of interpret what happened, describe, inform people. And we thought it was important to actually create a resource that talked about all those different pieces that talked about, and that's the resource guide. And then after we did this, and now we're getting kind of where this film project comes in. But before that, and this is where Wendy comes in, who we'll hear later. Um, she was at the Internet Archive, and they had this amazing project to create this online library where you could check out books. And so she approached us thinking, why don't we create a online library checkout system for the books around the incarceration? And that started this digital book project that we did. I think it was launched in 2019. And we started off with 300 books, a lot of them from the Densho library that we actually scanned so that people could actually not just read about, oh, there's a book about this, but actually literally get a online digital copy of it and actually read the book. And it's now grown to double that. It's over 600 books. And in fact, I just have a screenshot of the Internet Archive page of their digital library of Japanese American incarceration. So literally, you can go to this website and you can check out a book and read it. Which now brings us to today's talk, where Wendy said and agreed to do something like, let's do it with all the films, all the motion pictures around the Internet Archive. And of the projects we've done the Internet Archive, I think this may have been actually the most difficult. A lot of it had to do rights issues and things like that, but we'll get more into it. And so this brings us to our lunch and learn, uh, topic today. And let me quit sharing. And let's dive in and let's bring Brian Niiya on screen because I thought what a good way of starting this program would be to give sort of a historical overview of the motion pictures around incarceration. So Brian, go ahead and take it away.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Tom. And thanks for that overview of Densho, which, wow, it brings back a lot of memories over time. So yeah, just have a few minutes. So I think the main points I want to make are one, that there are just how many films that depict some aspect of the Japanese American incarceration exist. I don't have an exact number, but in doing work on the resource guide and encyclopedia, I came across so many mentions and subsequently viewed so many of them, but there's somewhere in the neighborhood of like 400. This includes everything from Hollywood depictions to independent documentaries and narrative films and so forth. But they're not equally distributed. You really see very few before 1990, um, something like 43, 63 in the 90s, and then over 200 in the 2000s and 2010s. Um, uh, as you probably know or imagine, the very earliest films depicting the incarceration were made as the incarceration was going on, and they are these sort of infamous WRA, OWI, Office of War Information, sort of propaganda documentaries that you see often. You see off clips of them often, even in current documentaries. There's a whole narrative and a whole story about these, but I'll just mention those. And these are in this collection. There were some interesting Hollywood depictions of the incarceration in the 1950s. But you really start to see a growth of films in the 1970s and 80s that kind of parallels the growing interest in the incarceration after a couple decades of silence, the same kinds of forces that led to the movement for redress and reparations that starts in that same time period. And a lot of these films in the 70s and 80s are tied to the redress movement, depictions of what's going on at the time, films made in the service of the redress movement that kind of reflect what was going on at that time period. There's also a growing mainstream interest in the incarceration. There were network TV documentaries, the earliest 1965 on CBS, Nisei, The Pride and the Shame. That same year, I believe the first film by a Japanese American about the incarceration, a student film at UCLA by Phyllis Tanaka called Moving Day, which unfortunately is not part of this collection, but is preserved at the UCLA Film and Television Archive. Um, and then this real growth in the 1990s and into the 2000s and 2010s. And I think a lot of the numbers are really driven by the rise of public funding that becomes available for Japanese American incarceration-related projects. The Civil Liberties Public Education Fund, which was a provision of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, awards a series of grants in the late 90s that inspires civil liberties public education programs for the states of Washington and California that continue to this day, although they were interrupted at some points, but they both are still in existence. And of course, the big Japanese American Confinement Sites Grant Program, which started in the legislation was 2006. Those grants started in the late 2000s, and as Tom mentioned, fund this project. But I think that has led, as well as just the general growth of interest in the topic, and sadly, the continued relevance of the topic to this boom of films in the 2000s and into the 2010s and 20s, enough so that Kenji Taguma and the Nichibei, for instance, have been able to do a Films of Remembrance program every year for like the last decade, highlighting kind of new films on the incarceration that just keep coming out. Our project is, although most of the films in the collection, I think, are from the 90s and 2000s period, I think we were really hoping to focus on this earlier 70s, 80s, 90s period, since I think these are the films that are most endangered and I think are the hardest to see. I think the earliest films in the collection, aside from the propaganda ones, are from 1974. And you'll see a clip of at least one of them, I think, in a little montage we prepared. One of the early visual communications films made by Alan Kondo called I Told You So, 1974, a profile of the poet Lawson Fusao Inada that includes his visit to the Tule Lake site. Just a great evocation, really feels of its time, captures the energy of that time. And also from 1974, also in this collection, a film called The Japanese American, made by the Handel Film Corporation. They made educational films for schools for decades. You've no doubt seen many of their films if you grew up going to school anytime from the 60s to the 90s. But this one is fascinating. It's narrated by the pioneering newsman Ken Kashiwahara, and I'm struck by the fact that he refers to Japanese Americans as we throughout the film, as if this was made by Japanese Americans. So anyway, with that, I'm going to stop because I could talk forever on this, but I think we want to just show a short montage of clips of films in this collection before turning it over to Tom and our panelists to talk about the collection in more depth. So.
Their evacuation did not imply individual disloyalty, but was ordered to reduce a military hazard at a time when danger of invasion was great. 2/3 of the evacuees are American citizens by right of birth. The rest are their Japanese-born parents and grandparents. The people are not under suspicion. They are not prisoners. They are not internees. They are merely dislocated people, the unwounded casualties of war.
My father, now a GI, went to say goodbye to his parents at the internment camp in the deserts near Topaz, Utah.
When you get beyond the barracks area, The desert of Topaz was something like this. Sand and scrub. First time I went there, the dust storms that they used to have there that just kept sweeping in, and very slowly you'd see the sheet of dust coming, so you tried to get under some cover as quickly as you could.
I think it was the summer of 1942. We were invited to play a high school prom over at Thermopolis, Wyoming, which is about 150 miles from where we were. Well, they sent a bus up. We played the gig. So word got around, I suppose, and we played war bond drives, Elks Lodge dinners, and whatever.
I think it should be preserved so that people know that this kind of thing happened in the United States, in Hawaii. People don't know that there was a thing like Honolulu internment camp, but they're getting to know now, so we should preserve it.
There are some who say, well, why talk about it? I think we should, if only to remind ourselves that this can happen in our democracy if we're not vigilant, because it did.
Did I know you at Topaz?
No.
You weren't at Topaz?
No.
Where were you? Manzanar?
No.
Maybe you weren't in camp. I don't mean to pry.
I was in Tule Lake.
Oh, Tule Lake. I see.
Do you really?
I'm sorry. I don't know what you mean.
And I don't know what you see.
Nothing. I just meant... Oh.
Oh.
I knew some other people who were branded as being disloyal. Oh! I mean to say, I knew some other people who were at Tule Lake. The Satos from Watsonville. Did you know them?
No.
Well, it was the silliest thing, really. Mr. Sato was a Buddhist priest, and after Pearl Harbor Day, he got on some list, and he was picked up by the FBI. Imagine, as if being Buddhist were some crime.
My father said he wanted to go to Japan. That's why we were in Tule Lake.
If you ever want to put anyone anywhere, this is the place. A few tules, a shallow lake, just a high, flat valley full of thin wind and thick weeds. If you ever need some lava beds, a game refuge, some concentration camp, this is the place. The hollow backside of Shasta to the west, standing there like the American sham my people were confronted with. The whole damn structure about to collapse. Struts and braces sagging.
Had other Americans had the courage to speak out, I think we would not be here today. We will stand with our Muslim American brothers and sisters, our Arab American brothers and sisters. We will speak out to stop the violence and the discrimination. We will reject racial profiling. We will dissent when our consciences demand. We will oppose the attack on civil rights. We will stand together and achieve a true redress victory for all Americans. We will not let history repeat itself.
Well, Brian, can you bring Brian back on the spotlight too? I just wanted to, acknowledge what a great trailer. I mean, I just got goosebumps, looking at those short clips, knowing that that's just a snippet. the other thing I wanted to do with you on screen, and I forgot to do this, was to actually introduce you. I mean, we've worked together for so many years. I just forgot, in terms of that people didn't know who you were. Brian is on the Densho staff. His official title is the content director. I think most of you know Brian as the editor of the Densho Encyclopedia. Um, Brian, I think from a personal and internal staff perspective, is one of Densho's secret weapons. I mean, when it comes to knowledge, expertise, breadth of just of knowing what happened to Japanese Americans around this topic, Brian is the most renowned and best expert in the whole world on this. And we have daily access to Brian. And for him to be able to give his input, and for those of you know Brian personally, he has also a very wicked sense of humor that we so appreciate most of the time. And but Brian, thank you for your guidance on this project. I know that there were certain films that only you probably knew because you probably watched more films than anyone else in the world around this topic, and so your expertise was so guided. So thank you so much.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. And yeah, I'm terrible at receiving compliments, so I'm very uncomfortable right now. But yeah, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to work at Densho, because no one could ask to be paid to do something you'd be doing anyway. And it's been a great joy to work on this in general, and this project in specifically, but just the whole Densho project in particular. So yeah, so thank you.
Great. So let's bring Wendy up, Wendy Hanamura. And as she's coming up, I just wanted to mention to the audience, I forgot to say this. So if you start having questions that you want to ask me or any of the panelists, use the Q&A function at the bottom of the window. You can use chat and we'll try to extract those, but just much easier if you ask your questions in Q&A. And yeah, and the hint is if you do it earlier, we'll see them earlier and you have a better chance of getting answered. So the next person we brought up, Wendy, and I thought about how I would introduce you, Wendy, and I guess a start when we showed that film montage. The second one was a clip from Honor Bound that you were the filmmaker about your father, and so it was great seeing and hearing a young Wendy Hanamura there. And so you wear one hat as a filmmaker. You also, and I knew of you as a journalist, a news journalist, especially in the broadcast journalism, and well known in the Bay Area. But the gem for me was it was about 10 years ago, and I'm a huge fan of the Internet Archive. The Wayback Machine. I was in the technology world, so I knew about this. And when I looked at their website, I came across your name as this director of partnerships, and I said, "Oh my gosh, here Wendy Hanamura, who I knew about, filmmaker, news journalist, connected very much to the Japanese American community, is now in this very interesting position at the Internet Archive." And it was the beginning of this very fruitful, enjoyable relationship between our two organizations and between the two of us, because I do miss our very long conversations. You are incredibly smart, and you ask and you keep me on task, to do all these things, which I so appreciated. And the very first project was, and it relates to a foundational piece for Densho, was the oral history collection, this massive video collection. And part of preservation is you want to share it with other organizations so that they're sharing or that they're preserving it also. So the complete oral history collection also resides at the Internet Archive. And in fact, they web host it, and you can actually get the interviews from there as well as from the Densho website. That was the initial project. And then, a few years later, you came to me because you said, the Internet Archive loves books, and we love to make these books available. Let's create a book collection. And that led to the very successful first thing we said, 300 books that we were going to digitize. And that was successful. We shipped all these books down to to San Francisco, and you guys scanned them, and then it's grown and grown. And then you had the idea, or we talked about the idea of how about motion picture? How about films? And that was the genesis of this project. And so you wear the hat of an archivist, a Japanese American community member, filmmaker, the ideal partner for this project. And so I'm just going to open-ended question, like, what would you like to say about this project and your participation and the Internet Archive's participation in this project?
Well, thanks, Tom. Thanks for inviting me. And thanks to the 200 people in the audience who've come from all over the country to attend this. I think of myself as a storyteller for social change. But when you're a storyteller, you also have to be a story keeper. I think of the fact that my mother, who was 14 when she was incarcerated, is now 97 years old. We're quickly coming to that moment when everyone who personally experienced the incarceration will be gone. And all we have are these oral histories and these books and these films. And what better medium than film, right, to capture this story? It really was a little bit of a pang to hear my father's voice. That was a 1995 film. I was 33 years old. I had just been laid off from my job as a reporter in Tokyo. And I thought to myself, if you could do anything in the world, Wendy, what would you do at this moment? And what I really wanted to do was tell the story of my father and the 442. And so I had been offered this job as a reporter at KPIX, the CBS channel in San Francisco. And I said to them, well, I'd really like to work with you, but I really want to do this story. I'll come be a reporter if you'll help me do my documentary. And they surprisingly said yes. And, that was a great film. It went on to, go across PBS. It was on CBS, but it was 1995. And if you wanted to see that film now, people always ask me, can you still sell those DVDs? Well, no, I really don't want to be in the business of selling DVDs. Who even has a DVD recorder anymore? I came to the point where I want to just make sure that it lives, that people can see it. So this is the perfect project. Now you can see Honor Bound in its entirety. You can download it. You can show it to classes. You can do what you want with it, because I have a lot of faith that preservation depends on access. And the broader the access, the greater the chance that this film will live to see another day. I just want to tell one story. Over the weekend, I was at another event and I met a woman named Yokoi. And I said, oh, are you Florence Yokoi? Are you related to Feb Yokoi? I did this film and he's like the most powerful interview in this whole film. I'll never forget it. And she said, yeah, that was my uncle, but I've never heard of your film. I've never seen it. I'm so surprised. So here we are, what, 20, 30 years post the making of Honor Bound, and the people who are in it, their own families don't know it exists. So that's why I wanted this project to happen. There has to be a life beyond the first airing of these films. And I think that's what Tom, you and I, and Brian and Jen, and all of us working on this have done. We've ensured that these 100 films now live in Densho, but also in the Internet Archive, where they will be preserved on 3 continents. We guarantee something called lifetime preservation. So right now it's on MPEG 4, but 10 years from now it'll be some other format. And the Internet Archive guarantees that it will transcode the entire video archive to whatever format it needs to be, so that people can always see it.
And so, Wendy, I want to bring up a point, because we're doing it from the perspective of preservationists and archivists, and we understand the importance of preserving and access. But there are some real legitimate reasons why filmmakers would not want to do this. And I want to really acknowledge this, because when I said this was a hard project around rights, and it was, filmmakers giving us the rights, and they had really good reasons why they wouldn't want to do this. And so I don't want to make this like a good guy, bad guy type of thing, because everyone has his choices, and I really respect people's choices to not want to make their films freely available online, because there are reasons. Can you go into some of those things in terms of why a filmmaker legitimately would not want to do this?
Absolutely. And I just want to say that the door is open for them to do it later on. Um, One is economics. You know, you're still making money from your film. I still have honor bound and educational distribution, and I get this little check every year from my distributor. I don't think that being a part of this is going to impact that. But there are other people who get much more substantial financial consideration for their film, so they don't want to jeopardize that. But I wouldn't even say the money's the biggest thing, Tom. I think people are worried about control. Now you could download Honor Bound and you could do with it what you want. I have to have faith that there are copyright limitations on that, that people will not violate that, that they won't abuse it. And I'm willing to take that chance in order to make sure that other people can see it. But not everyone looks at that risk reward benefit in the same way. And finally, you know, films are montages of copyright issues, right? I just happen to own all of the music rights, all of the film rights to my film, but not every filmmaker has that. And some of us, to be part of this project, had to take certain risks. Like I put into this project something I did in 1993 for KPIX called Gyobata, Quiet Devotion, the inspiration and architecture of Gyobata. Like I had to go into my basement. There were like 100 dusty boxes, and seriously, I pulled out all 100 of those boxes to find this film, right? This film. And is the copyright probably KPIX's? Maybe. Maybe it's mine. But KPIX does not care whether or not this film gets preserved. They don't have a copy of it. Only I have a copy of it. And I'm taking that risk because I think it's a pretty good risk that the need and call for preservation is more important than the minuscule copyright claim that Channel 5, KPIX, CBS might make. But those are the issues.
Yeah, no, thank you, because this is not a black and white issue. There's a lot of judgments, like you say. There's these cost benefits. The two of us can have an hours long conversation about rights, and even incorporating artificial intelligence and what is happening with the generative LLMs and how they're incorporating, scooping not only books but motion picture stuff, and it goes on and on. We're not going to get into this because we would this would be a serious tangent, but maybe for the audience to let you know that there are a lot of informed community members who think about this a lot, and we're talking with each other, and it's not by any means an easy issue, but please know that this is something we take very seriously and we're thinking about, and there is no one right answer, and we're still figuring things out. So that's maybe how we'll bridge that. Wendy, I have so many other questions, but we're going to keep going. So thank you, and we're going to move on to our next one, Frako. So thank you, Wendy. It's good seeing you. The next speaker I'm really excited about, because when we go and I talked about Densho's mission and preserving, there's the access, the sharing. Another word in there was educate, and and for me, because my background is more, kind of maybe more engineering, and I like to build things. I was more heavy on the building of the repositories and these collections, and I don't know as much about the education. This is where Naomi, the executive director, she has a PhD in education, so she's going to bring a lot to this. But this is the conversation I was the most interested in, Frako, because I know very little about how film is used, especially in a college environment. I kind of know how oral histories and other primary sources, but not film. And you are, a lecturer at a university, Cal State University, East Bay. And not only do you study kind of like film studies, but the Japanese American incarceration. So I would really love to get your thoughts about the use of film in the classroom and this project. So tell me.
Thank you so much, Tom, for having me. And thank you very much, Brian, for pulling me in here and introducing me to Densho at last. I've used Densho for years. I've taught online mostly, and in ethnic studies program at Cal State East Bay, which is in Hayward, California. And I have taught online since about 2003, and so these are online courses strictly. And I'm an adjunct lecturer. That means I don't have a lot of job security, but I've taught there for a long, long time in the ethnic studies program, which is very small and lets me do whatever I want. And the course, as I said, is fully online and asynchronous, so students are responsible for accessing their own films. And we can't just meet in a lecture room and I have a DVD that I show them and we discuss it and that's the end of it. They are responsible for providing their own films. And it's really tough to do that when the films are not fully available. And also I don't lecture. So the films themselves have to provide the lecturing content for my students. And also, the library on campus is pretty good about doing these licensing deals with people like Swank and Alexander Street and Films on Demand, but those are things that expire every year and have to be renewed, and then only students are allowed to access them. You have to be a student in order to do that. And so and DVDs are there, and some people even prefer physical media, which I understand, especially now it seems kind of cool to prefer the hardware stuff of software. But we really need something like the Internet Archive. We've used the Internet Archive before, and to see that there's a deal between Densho and Internet Archive is just really thrilling for me, because these are two institutions that I fully trust. And I know that they are doing the right thing about keeping materials safe and in a preservable form, and keeping up with the different technological changes and formats and all. And so I'm very, very pleased to see this collaboration. As for films, my aspiration is to be number 2 to Brian in having seen the most Japanese American incarceration related films. And as for my use of these films in my classes, in a typical 16-week semester in my course called Concentration Camps USA, the first thing that I want to show them is the first week is about what Americans were told. So we go through, the typical World War II era propaganda films, and we clearly label them as propaganda. And we have to look at them for the kind of wordings they use. They use terms like pioneering communities or dislocated people or unwounded casualties of war. And we kind of pry apart the wording and the images used in those films. And the next week, also, we look at a little clip from a 1942 movie, a really scabrous little film called Little Tokyo, USA, which has a triumphant finale in which all the Japanese Americans are rounded up and sent to camps. And this is considered a wonderful thing, because we've gotten those Japoteurs or those saboteurs that are trying to harm our government, our country. And then in the second and third weeks, we go into Hollywood films. And so in the 90s, films like Snow Falling on Cedars and Come See the Paradise were very earnest attempts to depict the incarceration experience. And they are well-intended, yes, but they are replete with white savior imagery, where the protagonist is usually a very handsome white young man, who has a thing for this beautiful Japanese American girl. And there's often a triangle or some kind of romantic interference in the plot, and so we look through those. And then I want to show them a film from the 1970s, John Cordy's Farewell to Manzanar, which I think is a very good treatment of the whole incarceration experience and a nice contrast to these other Hollywood films. But it's been really hard to find those films, and I put a DVD in the campus library, but I can't require everybody to see that because it's not as accessible. And then week 4, we turn to documentaries, and then we look at lived experience in films like Time of Fear about the Arkansas camps, and there are many of these, which is great. And then the next week we look at a very personal documentary called Rabbit in the Moon, which is a kind of pioneering film because not only is it a very personal film, but it also focuses on the resistance to the incarceration. And that is a kind of a newish thing. I mean, it's nice to see these earlier films from the 70s coming up I hope, prove me wrong in a way that resistance was being depicted in these films beforehand. I just didn't have access to them. But then we go through films like Beyond Barbed Wire to look at the 442nd, and then look at a 1951 film, a Hollywood film called Go for Broke with an exclamation point, and look at that. We also look at a snippet of Ken Burns' treatment of it in the war. And then we move into the resistance and we look at films like Conscience and the Constitution, Unfinished Business, go into Redress and Resistance at Tule Lake, films like that. And I'd like to get into more detail with films like Of Civil Wrongs and Rights, the Fred Korematsu story. But that has been a little bit hard to get a hold of too. And then we go into a kind of meaty, compact documentary like Resettlement to Redress. And then after that, there are weeks in which we show parallels between the incarceration and the 9/11, post 9/11 Islamophobia and surveillance, as well as child separation, the Muslim travel ban, and family separation at the southern border and stuff like that. And then at the very end of the semester, we come back to the Japanese American incarceration and look at the whole Wakasa Memorial controversy. So that's 16 weeks. Since it's a history class as well as a film studies class, it is just so packed, and I wish that I could turn it into a 1-year-long course where we do a lot more detail and a lot more of both those things. But that's pretty much what my classes are like.
This is the first I've heard this. We've just met a couple of weeks ago, and we had a meeting. So this is all new. I mean, I'm blown away. I literally was saying I want to come down and take your course, and
it's online. You can do it.
Okay, so I'm serious. I do want to take this course, and if there's anything I can do to help with it, I would love to do it. And I guess my question is, I mean, you're amazing. You're using amazing resources I think, in a very unique way that I haven't heard about before. Do you think other universities are going to, now with the access of, these films more online and stuff, do you think more of this is going to happen? Because it is such a rich topic, so many different perspectives, the development or the change in the community as it went through all these shifts. I mean, you capture it so well through these voices in film. I mean, it just seems like a wonderful way to learn this. I'm wondering, will this hopefully expand?
I hope so. To be perfectly honest, I haven't been as collegial as I should be with other teachers of the incarceration. And I've only shown my syllabus to a few people, especially those who are who are teaching the class as well, but are encountering it for the first time. So I feel like this collaboration between Internet Archive and Densho is a really nice step towards making the films so much more accessible so that the courses will increase too, and the uses of the films will be a real material factor in how the whole experience is taught. So yeah, I'm very encouraged by this whole collaboration.
Okay. Yeah, I'm noticing chat, and there are a lot of comments. People are really excited about what you just said. They want to know your link to the course, all that. But we're going to try to stay on schedule here and move on. But Frako, thank you so much. This was I just knew this was going to be the most kind of interesting, inspiring conversation for me, because this is in many ways why we did all that work for 3 decades, so that you and others could do what you're doing. This is so exciting. So thank you. So let's bring Jen on, and we saved this for the end. So we had, Brian giving this historical overview of kind of the history of film around the J incarceration. We had Wendy with her hat as a filmmaker and archivist and her role at Internet Archive, talk about, kind of her perspective. And then we had this, great talk from Frako from an educator. And Jen, you were the project manager for this amazing project. You're I think the senior development and communications manager on staff at Densho. And and you're going to actually give us a preview of what we've been talking about. So I'm just going to turn it over to you and listen.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tom. And thank you, Wendy, Frako, Brian, for sharing everything that you've already shared. Just really quickly before actually sharing my screen and showing you the collection, I just really wanted to say that it was such a privilege and pleasure managing this project because it really meant working with hundreds, truly hundreds of filmmakers, producers, collaborators, many of whom are actually here in the audience. So really, as Wendy said, thank you to all the filmmakers and people who contributed to this project and made this digital library possible. And I can confirm that, this was a really rewarding project, but it was also difficult because those rights issues, gathering the necessary permissions, it really was a struggle at times, but very much worth it. And luckily we now have these really great collections online to show for all of that hard work. And so I now have the privilege of showing you those collections. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and actually just walk you through the two web pages. First, Internet Archive's website, where we see the collection, but then also Densho's website. Though I do just want to mention this really is an exclusive preview in the sense that, we really are actively working right now to update and still upload many films that have been confirmed. And so, that said, if you're a filmmaker here, and if you do not see your film right now, I promise you it will be added very soon. And so, for everyone else here who's interested in exploring these collections, please do keep your eyes open because Densho and Internet Archive will be adding many more films in the next few days, in the next couple of weeks. And so if you can see my screen, you can see that there are many, many thumbnails with different films. And what's really, really great about Internet Archive is that you have so many options for filtering through these films, for organizing these films. For example, on the side here, you can see, you could look at the films made in 2018 or perhaps an earlier date. And you can also organize these films based on number of views, though you could also look at the films based on their title. So alphabetically organized here, as well as when they were published, and then also their creator. So there are just really many options for finding the materials that you might want to use, for example, in a classroom. And so maybe just to demonstrate a little bit more, let's give an example. So for title, I'll just scroll down and just sort of choose, let's see. So this is Ken Koka's film, Blossoms and Thorns, and I just pressed on a link and you'll see that it offers some more information about the usage as well as options for downloading the film. And I think what's really, really great about this collaboration between Densho and Internet Archive is that these films on Internet Archive's website also connect to the Densho digital repository. So here you can see that there's an option for actually seeing this film on Densho's website as well. And hopefully you can see this okay. Hopefully it's not too small on your screens, but now we're on Densho's website, and I'll just zoom in here. But what's really great about Densho's website is that, we actually link to other Densho resources. So while Internet Archive is crucial for preserving those films, as Wendy mentioned, we're really streaming the films through Internet Archive. Densho's website is adding additional historical context. including those extra context in the Densho resource guide that Brian described earlier. And to give you a sense for what that resource guide might look like, here you go. So I pressed on the resource guide article for Blossoms and Thorns, and it just takes you to a really short summary with some very helpful links, including other films that, or other, entries in the resource guide that you might be interested in. And I think really importantly, the resource guide also links to Densho's encyclopedia, which is a really, really expansive resource. Just to give you another example, so I just pressed on the link within the resource guide article, and that just brought you to this little entry in our encyclopedia, just explaining, well, what does Nisei mean? And so you can start to get a sense for how all of these websites, web pages are really connected and intertwined in really great and helpful ways. And I think one nice thing about adding, the film to Densho's collection and Internet Archive's collection is that all of these films that are, difficult to access at times, located in many different places, are now all together here, right? And I think it's just a really, really great resource, as Frako and others were saying, for just seeing this really diverse collection of films. And maybe just to highlight, Wendy's film one more time, since we're just so lucky to have Wendy here and to have partnered with Wendy. If you press on Honor Bound, again, you can see a little description of the film, but then really importantly, you can then go ahead and access the resource guide article for that film. So hopefully you're getting a sense for how to navigate these two collections online. I think the last thing I'll highlight about Densho's collection is that now, because these films are, its own collection within the Densho digital repository, which is the big, big archive that Densho maintains with thousands of historical artifacts and items, when you search for things, let's say reparations, you can actually go in to the archive and find these films. So at first, when I search for reparations, there are 251 items. But if I go in and filter for audio visual, then all of a sudden I just see these two films that really wouldn't be here if not for this new collection. And so I'll stop the demonstration there, but please do let us know if you have any questions. I think just one really important note about these collections, about this digital library, is that it is a living, breathing resource, which means, we will be expanding the collections, we'll be adding more films, and we can also share more information about, how to add films. If you are interested, or if you're a filmmaker or know of a film that you think would be a really great addition to this project. So I'll stop the demonstration there.
Well, and so Jen, just kind of a follow-up question, on just what you said. So, I'm thinking of what Wendy said, and you just said. There are actually filmmakers watching this right now, and if a filmmaker is interested in submitting their film for consideration, who do they contact? How do they do that?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Great question. So Brian and I anticipated that there might be more filmmakers who, hear about the project and then realize, wow, I really want to be a part of this. And so we created a nomination form, which, we'll share in the chat with you. But that nomination form is just a little Google form where you can submit a film that you think would be really, appropriate for, really important for this collection. And then, Densho staff and a small advisory board will actually, review those forms and then go ahead and say, okay, this is a great suggestion. Now we just need to make sure that we have the rights and permissions to actually add this film to our collection. And so I see that the link to the nomination form was put in that chat. And I think just one really important note is that when you do press on that film nomination form link, there's a little link within that says selection criteria. And these criteria are pretty broad, they're pretty loose, but really any films related to the incarceration, the events leading up to it, directly following it, and then just the only other, criteria that we wanted to highlight were just we're looking for finished or published works and not raw footage, no rough cuts. Though I would say just go ahead and submit any nominations. We'll take a look and, we'll still review everything that is suggested to us.
Great, Jen. Great presentation. I love that you have I never had the courage to actually go to the website and do a live. I always did like PowerPoint screenshots but it worked really well. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So, we're right at the, 1 hour mark, and we're going to now kind of transition to Q&A, and we're going to Nina, before we go, everyone on screen, can you just spotlight me for right now? Because there's a few closing comments I want to focus on first. But as I do these closing comments, now is a good time if you have a question to go to that Q&A button at the bottom of the window and write your question, then we'll get to it later. But the thing I want to say, and some of you who know me know that I retired a couple years ago from Densho. I'm still involved in terms of advising and looking at things because it's hard to not do that. But the clear thing that is happening right now that I just wanted to share, and I'm doing it from some way that's outside of Densho and looking at what they're doing or trying to do. You have so many. I hope you get an inkling of the amount of good work happening at Densho. A lot of it is very much behind the scenes, quiet work that is just building this incredible foundation of stories, historic photographs, documents, primary sources. You saw films. Earlier we talked about the books. Um, this incredible work on the detention facilities, not just describing them, but using the geographic information systems to really zero in so that you can actually zero in a place like Manzanar and go to the barrack that person was staying at and actually see which apartment. I mean, it's that kind of work. The names registry, that was this immense project that was the foundation for things like the Book of Names, the Idecho project. I mean, it all starts from this deep kind of intentional, caring research that goes into us by people who are really committed, who frankly don't get paid very much. They work, and you could say, like Brian says, oh, it's the labor of love. But all these people, being in that chair as executive director, you have to pay people to do this work, and you want them to be able to, have a sustainable life. It's really difficult for nonprofits. And in this current climate, where we were previously getting federal funding from the National Park Service to do a lot of these projects, that's disappearing. I mean, it officially hasn't disappeared, but the writing's on the wall that a lot is disappearing. So I mentioned earlier that if you like what you see, this is a good time to consider donating to Densho. And it's really easy if you go to densho.org/give. And Nina, once you put the link in the chat, you can do a one-time gift, or what is also very helpful if you could do a monthly recurring gift. It could be the amount of a couple lattes or cups of coffee a month, like $10 a month. But that kind of work, especially if enough people do it, is really sustainable. And the other pitch I'll do is your money, anything that is donated to Densho is used really wisely. I can't stress that enough. We've talked about collections that were started 30 years ago. They're still being used. These are foundation pieces that once built are around more and more. I mean, Wendy, gets this in terms of digital preservation. We talk a lot about this, that yeah, you could do monuments and buildings, and those are really important, but the content and the reach, that I would guess that I looked at the chat. People are all around the country And yes, you may have organizations there that talk about Japanese American history, but for the general population, students, teachers, other people who are learning about Japanese American incarceration, I would bet that most of the information actually in your community actually comes from Densho and online and not from some of these physical places or the Internet Archive, because where people get their information is online, and any support now would for Densho would really support that. As well as I'll make a pitch for Internet Archive. They're a nonprofit also, and they could use your support too. So that's my pitch. And with that, let's transition to Q&A. So Niiya, why don't you bring people back on, and I'll start looking at the questions that people are doing. So I'll start with one that's topical from Jody to you, Frako, and it's essentially the question is, what are you and your colleagues having to do to mediate your worry or concern that the current administration is going to shut down your teaching and courses?
That is really a tough question. And to be honest, I've been kind of insulated by that issue by simply living in California and working for a state university and feeling very cared for and supported in my own department. What would happen if they tried to shut my course down? Well, I would take it elsewhere. I mean, I see suggestions here for people suggesting I teach at Ollie or through Densho, my God, and various other places. I'm not going to shut my own course down for sure. I mean, I'm always talking about it to other people, and I would love to find when it comes time for me to retire, which is coming pretty soon, to be able to take it elsewhere and not be under the auspices of any kind of federal funding. So right now I haven't thought about it a whole lot because I've been fairly sheltered from it, but I realize that that's something I definitely have to think about.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Fraka. Yeah, I skipped this. I missed this one. There's one from Gregory. He saw the film montage, and one of them said, let's not repeat, let's not repeat history. Essentially, I mentioned attacks against immigrants, Alligator, Alcatraz, and so he says, I have not heard of any opposition from Japanese American organizations, and he puts in parentheses JCL. Will Densho be opposing the internment, quote, internment camps and immigration raids? And that's great, because at the beginning I talked about the mission, and there's the preservation, the education, the sharing, the access, but also inspiring action for equity, which I think is what Gregor, you're talking about. And Densho, I think, takes and so I'm going to answer this as the former executive director who had sat in that seat. And so this perspective, which I think kind of carries over a lot of the work. As you look at what Densho has been doing in terms of making oral histories, content, encyclopedia, from an education standpoint, what we believe is, the ability for people to critically think, not just be told what to think about things, like this is the truth, this is what you should think. It takes work, and using primary sources or things like film, like how Frako does. It's really engaging the critical thinking kind of muscle, and that's something that I think at the roots Densho believes, from education. But in a similar way, in terms of activism, Densho wants to support citizen engagement, people who want to understand and learn and think for themselves in terms of how things should be, not just say this is what is happening, this is how you should think about it, this is what you should do. I think Densho's stance is, let's bring these issues. And Brian does this periodically, and other staff members, and Nina, who's running the show, does this and writes wonderful pieces. She will, and the line I use in classrooms a lot is, history doesn't repeat itself, but often rhymes. And so what they will do is they will bring up things that are rhyming today, and to challenge, I think, people to think about how to do this. And because the Japanese American community has lots of different ways and different thoughts of how to approach things. And Densho wants to support the engagement as much as possible. And again, former ED, and this is something that Naomi should be talking about. But I just wanted to answer that that question. So I'm going to the next question. Jen, this might be for you or Brian. From Richard says, are the names of real individuals in the films indexed anywhere?
So I could answer this question, and thank you. Richard is actually a family member, so it's great to have you here. But I'll say in the databases themselves, I think some of the names are indexed, not all of them. But Brian, you can say more here. In the resource guide that Brian really, authored and put together, the names of the folks who are interviewed are written out. Is that right, Brian?
Yeah, by and large, resource guide articles have the names of everyone who was interviewed in the films. So, because as Wendy mentioned, a lot of times people don't know that person X is interviewed in film Y, because that's not always included. So that's, when possible, that's listed. The exception would be the handful of films that I or no one has been able to track down that we know exist. And so there's an article on them. One classic one I'll mention, there was a film made in 1971 by a local TV station in Seattle. I think it was Barbara Tanabe, I believe is her name, an anchor woman, made it, called Defense at Minidoka, that I've seen many articles about, was a big deal at the time, but I've not seen it. I don't know if it even exists. Would be great to include. But so things like that don't have that information, but anything that I or others who worked on the resource guide have been able to see does list the people who were interviewed for the films.
Great. So here's a question from Haruka. It's a rights question. If we were to submit, the question is, if we were to submit a film for consideration, under what CC license would it be released through the archive? Wendy, do you want to tackle just what a CC license is, and then and maybe Brian or Jen can talk about how Densho handles the different rights issues.
When you upload something into the Internet Archive, you get to select what rights are attached to it. And Creative Commons is a broad set of licenses that people created just for the internet, where things are a little bit different than publishing in a book. So, for instance, for Honor Bound, I made that Creative Commons by, and that means that you cannot use it for commercial use. You can, if you use it or reference it, you have to say by Wendy Hanamura, and only for non-profit use can you show it or reuse it. But other people within the collection, for instance, the Tatsunos who put out the film of Dave Tatsuno, held it as all rights reserved. You can watch it, but you can't do anything with it. So Haruka, if you were to submit a film, you would get to decide what kind of rights attached to that film.
Great. Jen or Brian, do you have anything to add to that?
No, just to echo Wendy, we can work with you to make sure that you feel comfortable with whichever rights and permissions for streaming only, for example, you would want to offer Internet Archive and Densho.
Great. So Jen, I think this question is from Kay, and she says, does Densho have announcements, press releases about this Internet Archive and Densho collaboration that I can use in a community newsletter? And then she says, I think kind of in a snarky way, if not, I'll need to write one. So do you have something that people can use?
Thanks, Kay. We've developed some marketing promotion materials that I will definitely share with you, or that we can share with everyone who attended, but we don't have an official press release. So Kay, if you want to work on that with me, then I'm happy to do so, but we'll make sure to reach out afterward and send you all of the materials that we do have. Thank you.
Okay. There's one more open one from Catherine, but I don't see the question. It's just maybe a comment that her parents and grandparents were at Poston and Puyallup, the Assembly Center, but managed to continue their college education from the Japanese American Student Relocation Council. So that's but there wasn't a question. Or maybe I'll ask the question, is there, Brian, are you aware of a film that talks about the Student Relocation Council? Or anyone know anything?
No, not offhand. There are 3 books written on aspects of the college students from camp who went to college, but yeah, I don't think that's been a subject of a film, surprisingly. It's I think it's mentioned in passing in films about resettlement, for instance, because obviously a lot of the say who went to who were these pioneers in Chicago or Boston or New York came out of that program, but I don't think there's anything specifically on that program. It's a great story. There should be a film.
Okay, and the one just came through. Yoshiro asked, "Are there any films about internees from, I guess, Topaz?" And there are. There are quite a few. I'm not sure how to. And Brian, I'll refer to you. I mean, is there one that you would recommend or suggest?
Not in particular, but yeah, there are quite a few that are specifically about Topaz or about an incarcerate Topaz. There's one about Dave Tatsuno, the filmmaker, and it's a documentary about Tatsuno that's quite good. There are a couple general ones about Topaz. So yeah, Topaz is probably one of the camps where there are many others.
Can I
And you
just
can
put in a plug that my family was incarcerated also at Topaz. And so within this broader film that's really about the 442, there is a really moving segment about my father returning to see his parents at Topaz. And then the Gyobata film that I hadn't seen since I made it in 1993. I forgot that, of course, the Obatas were at Topaz. So there was quite a bit in that 10-minute feature about Topaz. I think the real threshold that we can do next, Tom and Densho, is that we can take all these films and very easily create audio written transcripts, which will make all of them full text searchable. That would answer Yoshiro's question very well. And it's so easy today to get automated transcripts from audio. So let's do that so they can make them full text searchable.
Great. And also so you make this comment too. And if you have ideas for Densho, yeah, I'm not saying that they're going to do it. I mean, Densho staff right now, they're cringing. I said, no, just I mean, it's always good to have ideas like just Wendy just did. Um, and so feel free to send chat or to info@densho.org because they're always glad to hear from the community their thoughts. We're past the time when we were supposed to end. I mean, it's kind of like, yeah, I don't want to end this. This is so interesting and fun. Yeah, I'll do this though. I have just a closing thought, but before I do that, does anyone else have anything that they want to say in closing before we close this program?
Just me. I just want to thank you so much to all the filmmakers for taking the risk of putting it online and making it available for everybody else. You don't realize how immeasurably valuable it is to have your materials with us so that we can do all kinds of things, learning from it and using it for education. It's just really wonderful, and thank you so much.
I'd just like to say that what we've seen today, Tom, is that libraries are fragile, institutions are fragile, and data is the most fragile of all. It can be altered, it disappears. So the work of Densho, the work of the Internet Archive, is to make sure there are multiple copies through many different outlets so that this story, like so many important stories in our history, will never disappear.
Thank you. Brian or Jen, anything? No. So I'll just close and echoing both Wendy and Frako. I think this work is just so important and I think most people don't grasp how important this work is not only today but in the future. This is, I believe, is how the story is going to be preserved and shared 100 years from now. It's going to be what's happening right now. And then to Frako's point, the gratitude to the filmmakers. As the montage was playing and just knowing that this is just a snippet, it reminded me the emotional impact. If you want to really change hearts and minds, I really believe it comes from the heart, the feeling part. And I think filmmakers, because of your courage, your skill, are doing that, are able to do that. And it's such an honor to be able to preserve and share these stories for future generations. And so with that, thank you all who have held on and stayed through the program. This was a lot of fun. Thank you to Densho and the Internet Archive for hosting this. And at this point, we will close the program. So again, thank you all.